Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Recycling in Australia suffered a major setback in 2022 with the collapse of RedCycle, the country's largest soft plastic recycling program run through supermarkets. And while we're still recycling, the total quantity of waste we're generating is also increasing as our population grows. So how then do we reach the holy grail of a circular economy where goods are reused, recycled and repurposed to minimise or even eliminate waste entirely? One of the world leaders in this space is TerraCycle. Tom Szaky founded TerraCycle in the US more than 2 decades ago, and since then he's worked with more than 650 major brands across 21 countries to deliver solutions on recycling and reusing materials. He's visiting Australia at the moment, so we thought we'd grab him for a chat. Tom Szaky, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks for having me.
Take me through what TerraCycle does.
Absolutely. So the idea of TerraCycle is, how do we help make things become more circular by first recycling things that today do not have recycling solutions on them? Not just like the soft plastics that you mentioned, but anything from razor blades to toothbrushes, from wetsuits to bicycle helmets, so on and so forth. Then we help people make their objects from recycled content, effectively creating a circular economy of recycling. And then finally, work on how to elevate to reusable systems where there is no need for recycling.
Okay, so what's your motivation here? You've been doing this probably for longer than most of us have even heard about recycling. What is it about it that's driving you on this?
Well, to me, I am both very fascinated by the anomalies of the idea of waste. Waste is filled with so many strange things. For example, it's the only material that we pay to get rid of. Yet everything we possess will one day be owned by a garbage company. And for how big of a concept that is, garbage companies are also the least innovative companies per dollar of revenue they enjoy. And these are just a few anomalies amongst many. But then also solving it is incredibly purposeful because we are polluting our planet, filling our oceans, our rivers, and so on with all the waste that we produce.
How close? Let's start with Australia. How well is Australia doing in the shift towards the circular economy? How far down the track are we? If it's a 100-metre race, are we at the 10-metre mark or at the 50-metre mark?
Well, it's a good question. So I think there's 2 ways to answer that question. One is, how are we doing in Australia relative to everyone else? And then where are we absolutely? Yep. So I'd say, relatively speaking, Australia is doing pretty good as a developed country. We at TerraCycle have been operating here in Australia for 10 years. And I would say, give ourselves a good, solid middle grade. With that said, if we think about how far, to your question, we are to the finish line on a circular economy, we are, as a world, very far away, and unfortunately getting further away by the minute. As we think about, you mentioned, population growth leads to more waste, but we're also producing more waste per capita every year than the year before. And the waste we're producing tends to be less recyclable tomorrow than it is today, and let alone yesterday.
So I'm trying to work out what the biggest barrier to doing a better job is. What is the biggest barrier?
I think the best way to think about that question is, what really makes something recyclable, which is the base circular model. And many times we think that recycling has to do with whether something can be recycled. And then the answer would be it's technology or infrastructure that solves something. And the reality is, recycling is urban mining. Recyclers are there mining garbage for value, and they will collect and recycle what they like, and they will dispose what they don't. And if you then compare that to the biggest mega trend of product and package design, which is cost reduction, that's how we see things becoming progressively less circular, because we're making everything cheaper tomorrow than today. When we make something cheaper, there's less intrinsic value in it, which means that companies that are in the recycling business are going to get less interested in that sort of thing. A very good example of this, just to give a concrete case study, is if you look at beverage containers. The first beverage container that came onto the scene after we left reusable bottles in the 1950s was aluminum cans. And then we came out with PET bottles, and then cartons, and then pouches. And that progression is actually a progression of making the package progressively cheaper, and cheaper. And then if you look at the actual interest in recycling those things, aluminum cans are very high. Recyclers love it. There's a lot of value. But as you go from aluminum cans to PET bottles to cartons to pouches, it crashes down to zero for one key reason, is that there's less money to be made recycling those things.
Stay with me, Tom. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Tom Szaky from TerraCycle. So it's very much an incentive-based model at the moment. Do we have to shift that to more of an altruistic view, or what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I kind of get that we're actually losing ground, and particularly as the population grows, but how do we shift that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a number of factors, and I think every actor in the system has its role, right? So if we first go to us as individuals, we have sort of two votes we get to cast. I think we have one is the political vote, which we get to cast once in a while. And there we can use that to pressure lawmakers to pass more regulation that allow for-profit companies to bring in that altruistic thinking. A more plain way to say it is start paying for their externalities. You're going to see that coming to Australia with extended product responsibility regulation that is rolling out, deposit return schemes, all these different things that allow for the regulatory framework to help. The other, though, as individuals, is we have the vote with what we buy and what we don't buy. And it's really important for us to patronize those products that are more circular and not to patronize the ones that are less. So that's from the consumer point of view. From a manufacturing point of view, here is the big tension for manufacturers. The biggest thing that usually drives product is product price. And so there's this great goal to reduce price because that'll drive more volume of product sales. And as we reduce price, we're making things intrinsically less circular. So the question there is, how do we create product design where we are not selling disposable fashion or disposable packaging, but things that can have quality, longevity, or if it's in the world of packaging, can be reused or profitably recycled. And if we're in a conundrum where our business model doesn't allow us to do that, maybe we're a stakeholder at a company where it's just not going to happen, then we can think about voluntarily funding solutions. That's what TerraCycle does quite a bit in Australia, where companies like a Sephora or a Mecca or a David Jones or many others in that example are funding cosmetic recycling because they can't really change, what that cosmetic products are made from easily in Australia, but they can at least fund and finance a solution so that people can recycle those waste streams. And today you can walk into one of those stores and drop it in a TerraCycle bin and off it goes and gets recycled because the funding is there.
Okay. So, I mean, I was looking ahead of this interview, I was looking at the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation's 2030 strategy, and it talks about end-of-life packing processing costs charged to the brands, like to manufacturers, in the next couple of years. Does that fit into what you're talking about? Because that certainly provides them with a financial incentive to have a reusable packaging rather than something they have to get rid of.
You are precisely right. So that type of regulation should be a very positive stimuli to the circular economy. The real question, the devil in the details, is usually in EPR or extended product responsibility regulation, which is this form of regulation. Generally, what happens is it moves the cost from being paid by municipalities, which means it shows up in our property tax or our rent, depending on if we're renting or owning, to product prices. Because it's paid by the producers. So it's sort of think of it like shifting from income tax to sales tax. The real question is not which hand is paying. It's, is there net more money in the system? If there is, more things will get recycled. And if there's less money in the system, then less things will be recycled. And that's really the key thing to watch out for as this type of regulation comes in, because it can be very exciting if it's done very well from that point of view.
Tom Szaky, founder and CEO of TerraCycle. I want to get on to some of the innovation that you guys have introduced in recent years. Cigarette butts, one of my most hated things in the world, yet you've done work around trying to reduce the waste of cigarette butts. Is that right?
Absolutely. We are close to having collected and recycled our billionth butt all over the world. And look, this is, you asked earlier, what can we do? Cigarette butts are a wonderful sort of product to ask this question on, because the best thing to do is stop smoking. And if you stop smoking, there will be no cigarette butts whatsoever, and you'll be healthier at the very same breath. With that said, still a large portion of the population smokes, and cigarette butts make up the largest portion of roadway litter, and they're horrendous, from a toxin in the environment point of view. So in that example, we get funding, and in this case, from the producers of cigarettes, but also from places where you may see high consumption of smoking, think cruise ships, casinos, all the way to individuals. And they fund what it costs to really collect and recycle a cigarette butt, because we have to not just get it, and then we have to shred them, clean them, separate the ash, tobacco, paper, compost it, and take the filter, which is made from a plastic, and then make that into new plastic products.
How do you get them?
So collection with waste streams is interesting. It's all about where is there high consumption of certain waste streams, right? And so every single waste stream is different. If you took something as simple as tennis balls, well, you'll go to tennis courts. That's a very simplified example. If it's pens, it would be schools and businesses. If it's cigarettes, it's going to be in city environments where there's a lot of nightlife. So not as much residential, but like urban cores where you see bars and restaurants, because many folks will go outside to smoke. But also then casinos, cruise ships, those tend to be really high propensity of smoking. So we target these locations where there's high consumption, and this will shift waste stream by waste stream. So if it's contact lenses, we work with optometrists to set up major collection points to recycle them and so on.
Will we get there, Tom? Will we get to a circular economy, or at least a point where it's good enough?
So it's a great question, because I want to, if I may, probe at the question. Circular economy is not a perfect sustainable system. All circular economy really means is that the material is being honored and continues to go around, which eliminates the need of extracting more materials. Now, this is really important because extraction, mining, farming for new products is the biggest impact on our planet, on any challenge that the planet has. If it's deforestation you care about, or species extinction, or climate change, or garbage, all of these things, the biggest genesis of that is extraction. And that's the real virtue of the circular economy, is it reduces the need for extraction because we honor the materials and they go around. However, even in something like reuse, you have to collect the package, clean it, and refill it, which does take energy and resource. And so the true perfect economy, I would argue, is where our net consumption is in balance with nature. And there, the real meditation I think we need to have as human beings, especially if our population is going to continue to grow, is how do we really bring that in balance and move away from this hyper-consumerism that really came onto the scene in the 1950s? That, done circularly, I would argue, would be the perfect economy. And we have a long way to go, but at least I have hope that the tools and the systems are there, and they have been proven. We just have to implement them and scale them and fund them.
Tom, thank you very much for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thanks for having me.
That was Tom Szaky, founder and CEO of TerraCycle. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.